Hello, welcome to Warwickshire County Record Office and the first ever live stream of behind the scenes at the Record Office, which is a tour that we do sort of semi-regularly to groups that come in and visit us. But this is obviously very different times, and it's the first time we've done it on the internet like this, so I hope you enjoy it. We plan to make it last about 45 minutes today, so we want to try and keep it short and snappy. My name's Rob Eyre. I'm the senior archivist at the Record Office, and today I'm joined by my colleague David Hodgkinson, who's also an archivist at the office, and David will be filming and producing, if you like, the event as we go along. And together with our colleagues, we collect, preserve and make available records relating to the county of Warwickshire. Now, I won't say much more about the records at this stage because what we've done is filmed a segment for you to look at, which is going to last about 10 minutes of the strong rooms. And the strong rooms is where we keep all the documents. Now, we've filmed it because the Wi-Fi signal isn't very good in the strong room. So the plan is shortly we'll take you to the bit of recorded film, and then we'll come back live, and I'll show you, spend most of the rest of the time showing you some of the documents that we've got at the office. So before we do that, I think David is going to post an image which basically shows you that if you would like to ask us any questions, you can do so. It should be down on the bottom right hand side of the page. There's a box which you just type in the question and then press the arrow to send it. So I'm sure many of you will have used this kind of technology many times over the last few months. So we welcome any questions from you. So without further ado, when I get the signal from David, we'll go over now to the recorded segment. While David's just preparing that, I'll just say we are socially distancing throughout this whole event. There's only the two of us in the office, and obviously we're currently closed to the public, but now we'll go to the recorded segment. Well, welcome to Behind the Scenes. I'm about to show you some of the strong rooms. We have four altogether, two which were built when the Record Office was first built in the early 70s, about 1973, and two were added in 2003 when we had a major refurbishment. So I'll show you two of them now, one of the old ones and one of the new ones. Now, Strong Room A and Strong Room B are pretty much identical. They haven't changed a great deal since they were first built in the early 70s. Strong Room B's underneath us. So what I'll do now is just take you for a quick tour around this part of the strong room. On the right, if you look closely at the labels, if we can get one in focus, you'll see that they refer to, you see those numbers with a DR prefix in front. The DR stands for Diocesan Records. So these are basically all the records that have come in from the various parishes in the county. We mostly look after the records for the post-1974 county of Warwickshire. So Birmingham, Coventry, have got their own record offices, and now look after certainly Birmingham looks after all the parish records for there. And the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust has also got a record office as well, so a lot of the records relating to Stratford are there. But pretty much everywhere else we've got parish records, and I love the parish records. And it's not just that we collect the parish registers, so you know the records of baptisms, marriages, and burials. There's a wealth of other information in there as well, particularly about the Elizabethan poor law. So there's lots of information about ordinary people, pauper apprenticeships, information to do with the laws of settlement, which is basically establishing where somebody was allowed to live. Bastardy papers, where a child was born out of wedlock, and the parish is trying to establish who the father was to make them pay for the upkeep of the child.
There's the overseers of the poor records, which record lots of payments to individuals in the parish who may have been sick and needed looking after, or widows that had no other means of income. So, lots of really interesting social history going on. You'll notice there's the racking is mobile racking to save space. So we're doing a lot of this all day, winding backwards and forwards. You see, we've also got down here lots of volumes of newspapers. We've got very good collections for the Warwick Advertiser and the Leamington Courier, and some rugby advertisers as well, and one or two others. And as we move up the strong room, you'll see there's some rather large maps. A lot of these are maps of various estates in the county, and some of them are maps called tithe maps, which was a survey that took place in the 1840s, and they're probably the most accurate maps you get before the Ordnance Survey. Lots more maps up here. This section of the strong room contains a lot of records with a CR prefix, if you can make that out. CR stands for County Records, and essentially it covers a lot of the other records apart from the parish records, with one or two exceptions. So, for example, records of the landed estates. We've got a massive collection of records from Warwick Castle here, and from Coton Court, of Charlcote, from the Arbury estate up in the north of the county, and many others. We've got lots of business collections here as well, which I'll perhaps show you the location of some of those shortly. We take in school records. We've got lots of school logbooks and mission registers and that sort of stuff from schools. Antiquarian papers from various collectors, and the records of various institutions such as an organisation such as the Women's Institute, local government records, parish council records, district council records, all sorts of material really. Now the strong rooms conform to the current British standards, and we have to maintain the temperature and humidity here, which is something that my colleagues in the conservation department oversee. And you can see this device here, this hygrometer, is recording temperature and humidity. Ideally you want around sort of 15 to 18 degrees centigrade, and the humidity is usually in the range of the low 50s, though it will vary a bit depending on the time of year. But obviously you want to try and maintain a fairly constant level with both of those things really. Air conditioning as well. We don't necessarily need to keep the air conditioning on all year round. In fact, we don't now. We just certain times of year. But again, our conservation team monitor the effects of the air conditioning in the strong rooms. Acid-free boxes, or boxes that have very little acid in them anyway, to be more accurate. If you look closely, you can see the little holes in the boxes. That's to allow fresh air to circulate, which is very important. Obviously, one of the biggest enemies in terms of document storage is mould, and that's obviously something we have to keep a fairly close eye on. Right, so we're now going to have a look at one of the new strong rooms. This is strong room C that we're just approaching. I'm now going to attempt to open the door. Right, so this is strong room C. So this is one of the ones that was added in 2003, which I mentioned earlier. You'll notice we've got lots of smaller boxes on fixed racking here. These are photographs. We've got a very large photographic collection, about 200,000 photographs altogether, including lots of late 19th century ones. A lot of these ones in the small boxes are glass plate negatives, and also some lantern slides. We've got some terrific collections from local photographers which people can come and look at. Some record offices have separate strong rooms at a lower temperature for photographic collections. Unfortunately we haven't got that at the moment, but it's something that we may want to look at in the future. These are also photographs stored in the boxes just here. Now I've just relocated down to Strong Room D, which is just underneath Strong Room C, which is the one we were in previously. On the left here, you can see one of our business collections. These are mostly photographs in this aisle, but it's this particular collection contains ledgers, apprenticeship records, plans, all sorts of things, and it relates to Willans and Robinson, which was a company which was best known for making turbines, and they were based in Rugby. And at one stage in the 20s, they were the biggest suppliers of electricity in the country. So we had that catalogued with some aid of some funding a few years ago, and we still have a team of volunteers actually that are extracting information from that collection. But that's just one of a number of business collections we've got. We hold some, excuse me, some of the records of Donald Healey Motor Company, which was based in Warwick. We've got some of the records of Flavel's Cookers, which is another firm from this area. We've got a large collection of records relating to the Needles Industries, which were based in the west of the county. Smaller amount of material from some of the hatting firms in the north. We've got a lot of mining records as well from the north of the county. So yeah, quite a variety of stuff, and it's certainly an area of collecting that we would like to continue to expand on in the future. We've also got down here, you'll notice some rather nice antiquarian volumes. We have a rather large library. A lot of it is accessible in the search room, but we can't fit all of it in there, so some of it is now kept in our strong rooms. And you may have noticed at the top there some rather nice tin boxes and wooden boxes. Some of our collections come still stored in the original boxes, particularly from solicitors. We have a number of collections from old solicitors firms around the county. We currently have 734 cubic meters of storage space in our 4 strong rooms, most of which is now full. As I say, we had our last refurbishment in 2003, and we're now coming to the stage where we're starting to look at where we go next in terms of additional storage, because we're certainly going to need it before very much longer. Everything that comes out of the strong rooms has to do so via a document request slip, as you can just see a bunch of them there. There's 2 parts of the slip. The white part is kept in the search room, so that the duty archivist has a record of what people are looking at, and the yellow part of the slip, as you can see just there, is kept in the box or on the shelf where the original document lives. So obviously everything has to be matched up at the end of the day to make sure that all the documents have gone back into the correct place. So I think I won't have covered everything here, but this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So that gives you some idea of what our strong rooms look like.
Okay, right, we're back live in the search room. And I'm standing next to a bank of our card indexes, as you can just see behind me, which seems like a very old-fashioned way of interrogating our collections, but they're still extremely useful and contain lots of information. So it's going to be a few years yet before we abandon these completely, and they're still used a lot by visitors to the search room. And then behind me you can see some of our catalogues. Many of these are still typed catalogues, but of course when we catalogue now, we don't use typewriters. We use specialist software called Calm. So basically we create an electronic catalogue straight away. Now, but as well as cataloguing new material into Calm, we're undertaking the very lengthy process of tackling all the old catalogues, retro converting them into a format that can be fed into the Calm software. And what happens to that information is that eventually, periodically, we upload it online to our online catalogue, which is called Warwickshire's Past Unlocked. So please take a look at that. It has a wealth of information in it about our collections, and I would say that about 60% of our catalogues are now available to browse on Warwickshire's Past Unlocked. in the vast majority of cases, I don't mean it's digital photographs of the actual documents. It's just the physical catalogues. But certainly, it's worth looking at that before you come to the record office and get a feel for whether we have some of the material that you might want to look at. Now, David is going to show you some film that we took earlier of the what's called the sorting room. Now, this is where we bring documents when they've first come to the office. We take them into the sorting room, and that's all part of what we call the accessioning process. Basically, when we take in new collections, they can come in 4 ways mainly. The first one is as a gift, which is obviously what we prefer, a donation to the office. The second way is a deposit, or if you prefer, a long-term loan. And we will still take material on loan, although it's usually on the understanding it is on loan for a long time. The third way we take material in is via purchase. We have a small budget for purchasing collections, but it's not a very big one, and so we often rely on funders to help us with that. And also the Friends of Warwickshire County Record Office, which is a registered charity that support the Record Office, and they run a whole series of events throughout the year to raise funds for the office, and with some of that money they help us to purchase small collections or individual documents, and also equipment for the office as well. So I like to give the Friends a plug. So if this inspires you to come to visit the office and find out more about the history of the county, then a good place to start is always to join the Friends. And the fourth way documents come to us is through statutory means. So, for example, some of the parish registers I was talking about earlier, there's a statutory requirement at the Record Office. Now, so what we do as part of the accession, on that film, you should see a little an old ledger, which we still record with an ink pen. We still record all the information in there. We give the collection a number, obviously. We have the details of the depositor and just an overall description of the collection with dates. And most of that information, apart from the details of the depositor, obviously, that is all available to view on Warwickshire's Passed and Locked, which I was referring to earlier. And I would say about 99% of the accessions are on there. So a wealth of information that you can look at online. So, and the sorting that you're just looking at there, the other thing to notice is you obviously see all the files of correspondence in the background. It's very important to keep lots of detailed information about all the collections. That as part of the accessioning process, we'll obviously discuss, to what extent we can make the material available. Is there any sensitive material in the collection which has to have restricted access? And also whether we have permission to allow people to publish material in the collection. And so those files are referred to quite regularly by staff, particularly the archive compliance officer, if she's dealing with questions relating to publishing or access or issues like that. So now we'll come away from that segment of film, and we've got plenty of time. Actually, we've got about 25 minutes. So what we're going to do now is show you some documents, some of my favourite documents which I've produced for you in the search room. So David will eventually turn around and you'll get a sort of a view of what the search room looks like. And just to say briefly before we do that, just to remind you, if any of you have any questions that you want to ask, David has got that screen so you can see how you can do it. So we'll come back to that at the end. Right, so if David would just like to turn round, so he might just give you a quick panoramic view of the search room, and then I'll start to present some of the documents that we've got here today. We've also taken screenshots of each of these documents as well, so at various points we might cut to those so you can see them in a bit more detail. No, they're not in any particular order. I haven't done them chronologically today. They're just as we decided to put them out. So the first item here is, as you can see, very nicely presented. Obviously, this is quite modern, but the document itself that you can see there dates from 1358/9. and the reason for the two dates, by the way, is because of the change in the calendar. We used to use a Roman calendar, the Julian calendar, until 1751, and then we switched to a Gregorian calendar. Now, obviously, the modern calendar starts in January and goes through to December, but the Roman calendar started at the end of March and went through the year that way. So it actually matches what we still use as the financial year. So if a document's created in the first 3 months of a year before 1751, then the convention is always to describe it using both years, the old year and the new year. So this is 1358-9. It's a parchment deed. I don't know if David wants to just flick to a more detailed bit of the image so you can see it. And it's a charter produced for Thomas Beauchamp, Earl of Warwick, and it was to grant freedom of tolls for merchants to come into Warwick to trade. This is obviously very important for the town, and the importance of this particular document is reflected in the beautiful illumination that you can see around the edge of the document. Not many medieval deeds have that kind of detail on, only the ones that are very important. And that will be a mixture of minerals and plants they'll have used to create that. And if you come back live, I'll just step away actually so that we can approach the document. You might have a bit of glare on the glass here, so I'm not sure how this will work, but you can see the document there and some of the conservation work that's taken place by our conservation department on the seal. And the little box at the bottom indicates that at one stage it was owned by James Fish, who was a famous 18th century cartographer who lived near Warwick St Mary's, the big church in the town. Yeah, so as I say, it's been deposited at the Record Office for many years. So that's a fine example of a medieval document made of parchment. I don't think I said that. It was made of parchment, which usually means sheepskin, occasionally goat's skin. Right, so now we're going to leap forward quite a bit. This is possibly one of the most popular documents we've got, actually, and comes out quite regularly for groups that come to visit us, and it's called the Known Thieves album, at least that's what we call it anyway. And we've got 4 of these, and they're produced by Warwickshire Constabulary. This one relates to the Aston division of the Constabulary, and essentially what it is, it's an album featuring people who've been arrested or people with criminal records. In some cases, you get, for example, a good example might be a list of pickpockets or card sharks at a racecourse. Obviously, we've got Warwick races here in Warwick, and so, for example, in there you've got a list of a gang that was arrested in Doncaster, and obviously the local forces obviously photographed them and passed that on to other forces. So I think there's quite a lot of exchanging of information. And each, I don't know whether David wants to flick to the image. I don't know whether you can see it on the image. You've probably got a photograph, but below that you'll see some details of the individuals, date of birth, if they had any tattoos or other distinguishing marks, and then at the bottom you have a list of sort of previous convictions. So there's quite, a little bit of family history there. We have had people that have discovered relatives in this volume, including one member of staff. And some of the photographs are absolutely fantastic. So I've got it open here on a page showing some of the women in the volume actually. So I'll just step away so David can just show you in a little more detail some of the images there. And as I say, when we have people in the office, they do like to spend time browsing this volume. Okay, right, so we'll move on now. Now we're going to go back in time again. Now we're going back to the end of the 16th, beginning of the 17th century. Now this is fantastic. I think we've got 4 of these. Now these are account books produced for Fulk Greville. Fulk Greville, who was Lord Brooke, who lived at Warwick Castle, and he was treasurer of the marine causes. So basically, it was his responsibility to look after the Navy at the time, and the date on this particular document is 1599. So that gives you an idea, I think, if you think about it, what a responsible job it was at the time, because the Spanish Armada was in 1588, the first one. There was 3 attempts to invade the country around that time, and so having an effective ship-shaped navy was hugely important. And you know, what a responsibility. So that was one of his jobs. He had a number of offices in Elizabethan court. He was also famous for being a playwright and a poet as well. David just wants to switch to the document. You can see it in a bit more detail there. This is the first page of the document. The early section referred to Chatham Ordinary, which is basically Chatham down in Kent, the docks down there, and the ordinary means that they're on. They're not currently in battle stations. So what's happening is, I think that a lot of the galleons were banked on the sandbanks down there while they did running repairs on them. And while they were there, they had a standing crew. And I don't know if you want to come back live again, David. And the standing crew are listed in these volumes here. So you've got the name of the ship down the side. We've got the Ark, the Victory, the Due Repulse, the Hope. Also in the volume, the Mary Rose. Lots of famous ship names. Now, they aren't necessarily the most famous ship that had that name, because the Navy used to reuse names. But certainly it's not difficult to actually do some look online and find some information about some of these ships that are listed in here, and the various battles that they were involved with, and what happened to them, which I think is quite fascinating. So you've got a list of the standing crew, and the first example here of the Ark. At the top, you've got John Gray, who was the master mariner, and then it's his payments for 13 weeks, which was £6 and 10 shillings. And then you've got the boatswain listed. He was an officer who was responsible for the equipment on the ship. You've got the purser, the cook, and then you've got the rest of the standing crew. And we're very lucky to have these really at the office. And the main reason we've got them here is because Fulk Greville's was the treasurer of the marine causes, and so he obviously kept them at Warwick Castle, and they came in as part to the record office as part of the Warwick Castle collection, which we own. And is available for viewing at the record office. So that's that document. So we're moving on. David wants to follow me around there. We'll go around the other side. Let's have a close look at that one. You may have noticed we've got some of the tables typed off at the moment. The search has been reconfigured for a booking system that we were operating in the second half of the summer. And once this lockdown has been eased again, hopefully we will go back to that system or probably, I imagine, for most of the winter, where people will be able to book via Eventbrite a slot in the search room to come and view what documents that they want to look at. So the next document we've got here is a recipe book produced by a lady called Mary Wise. Now, Mary Wise was married to the son of Henry Wise, who was the royal gardener to Queen Anne, and his estate house was on this site where the record office is now. Eventually, it was taken down brick by brick and moved to Richmond, Virginia, where it was rebuilt as a tourist attraction, and it's still there today. We've got part of it still here, which is now used by the conservation staff, but most of the office is obviously been rebuilt. But anyway, what we've got here is an example of a recipe book. Now, we've got several of these through the collections, and they were often kept by the ladies of the house, because obviously they didn't have many, well, there were printed books, but they were very expensive, and he didn't have a lot of recipe books. So what happened was that they would exchange recipes with their friends and relatives, and they would keep them in these volumes. They probably didn't do most of the cooking, of course. They would have had staff to do that. But this is a particularly fine example, and it lists in the table of contents at the front. You've got making elder water, to make sausages, to make gingerbread. So a lot of some of the things that you would recognise now, and some maybe that you wouldn't so much, including an approved recipe to ease labour. So I wouldn't recommend anybody tries using that one. And so they were used not just for recipes, they were also used for remedies as well. There's one in there as well for cleaning teeth. And just turn the page. So that's the front. So if David would like to come round, you can just see some of the recipes there. To collar a collar of pig, to pickle walnuts. Always gets a laugh, that one. And also good for the stone at the bottom there. So another remedy, which I think is mainly milk and clover.
drunk out of a bowl. Now, David will just switch now to some other examples so you can see them in a bit more detail. Beautiful writing. We think it was probably written by Mary Wise. The later, that I think on that particular page, you've got some recipes for lobster and crayfish and gooseberry fool. I think, is that right? Something like that. Yeah, David's nodding. So that's beautiful writing. And later on in that volume, you've got a different hand. So whether it was carried on by other members of the family once Mary Wise had died, I don't know, possibly. So that's the recipe book. So now we'll move to the next item. Now this is fantastic. This is a Board of Health map which was produced in 1851. Now Board of Health was set up after 1840, after the Public Health Act. I mean, many of you will know that the mid to early 19th century was a time when there was a lot of epidemics, typhoid and things like that, which affected communities, particularly in built-up areas where towns and cities were developing. And so the Board of Health was set up to try and tackle this. And the Ordnance Survey were commissioned to produce maps of towns to show the layout, the width of the road, drainage, wells, and things like that. And they vary from place to place. I know that there's a Board of Health map for Warwick, there's one for Leamington, there's one for Atherstone, there's one for Rugby, I think there's one for Stratford. So yeah, a lot of towns have them. But this is a particularly beautiful example because I don't know if David wants to just zoom in there. As you can see in colour, what fantastic detail it is. Now the bit that I think David probably is focusing in the park there is the estate house that I was just talking about earlier, which was the home of Henry Wise. I'd like to say that we arranged it so it was after the previous document, but I think that's just luck. But yeah, as you can see, a beautiful map, and the record office is now built on the site of where that was. And we've also, I think David has also got on the screenshot another page from the map which shows St Mary's in Warwick, which I should say is the main church in Warwick, because I shouldn't assume that you all know Warwick. Many of you may not, so it's a very grand church, definitely worth a visit if you come to Warwick. Right, so that completes the first two tables. So now moving on, we've got here a parish register. I mentioned the parish registers earlier. I also mentioned that wonderful social history you get in the parish records, but that includes the registers as well. Now this particular register, made of parchment, has got in 1744 quite a lot of burials recorded, and I think if David just flips to the image, you can probably just see it there, with SP in initials next to a lot of the people that have died. Now SP, some of you probably guessed, stands for smallpox, and there was indeed a smallpox epidemic in Shipston in 1744. In fact, it was the second one. They'd had another one about 20 years before that. So this is quite topical in a way. Obviously, at the moment, the fact that we're living through a pandemic, which is on a global scale, where obviously people here are dealing with something that for them was very much on a very local scale, and the number of people that died would have had a major impact on the town. So David just wants to come back. Just turn the page over here. It says the smallpox was this year in 150 families. 406 persons had it, and 48 died of it. So that's quite a lot for a small community. And one of the ways that this differs from the current pandemic that we're living through at the moment is that disproportionately, this pandemic is obviously affecting older people, or tending to affect older people, whereas the smallpox, it's the opposite. And if you look, most of the entries in this register name parents as well, which indicates that it's actually children that have died. So parish registers contain lots of really interesting social history, as well as just recording baptisms, marriages and burials.
So the next, now we move forward again slightly. This time we've moved forward to the end of the 18th century. This is 1795. Now this is a curious document. These are hair powder tax returns. Now these are located in our quarter sessions collections, which I don't think I mentioned on the tour around there. That's what I mentioned, the DRs and the CRs, but the QSs or quarter sessions is another big section where there's a whole wealth of documents around produced by the courts, which had a judicial function, but also an administrative function as well. And there's lots of interesting administrative records in the quarter sessions, and this is one example. Now the hair powder tax was produced with the idea of William Pitt the Younger, who was the Prime Minister that introduced income tax. In fact, he introduced lots of taxes. Why did he do that? Because, well, we had the wars with France at the time, and we needed to raise money for those military endeavours. And this was one example, a rather curious one, to tax people for the powder that they put into their wigs. I think it was a guinea that per household. Now it sort of just wants to switch to the document so you can see it in a bit more detail. It lists the names of the parishes, and I've got it opening on a page for Stoneleigh, which I think you have there as well. One of the entries is for the Honourable Mrs. Lee. Stoneleigh Park, for those of you who don't know, is just outside Warwick. Now, most of the people she's paying to have hair powder for are servants, because in a way it was pretty ineffective as a means of raising taxes, and I think one of the reasons for that is that people just stopped using it because they were being taxed. And another reason was it was beginning to go out of fashion. If you think you're sort of coming into the Regency period, you got Beau Brummel, all that sort of clean cut look, and you know the idea, and powdered wigs has become quite old-fashioned, which is why a lot of the entries relate to servants that presumably would still have been wearing powdered wigs. So that's one little interesting curiosity. And then we have one further document to show you, which is just on the final table here. Now this is a map. Actually, I don't know whether if I swap places today we can come in and so you can see him rather than looking at me. This is one of our oldest maps that we've got. It dates from around 1600, and as you can see, it's in beautiful condition, and it's decorated with the Sheldon coat of arms, and we think it was produced for Ralph Sheldon, who owned this land in Brailes, and he was the lord of the manor, so he owns everything in the manor, including down the bottom there some rabbit warrens which have been drawn in. And also it's interesting to note, if you look closely, the fields. I'm just going to put my finger in there so you can probably just see the stretching across there. There's an example of the fields, the little strips of that was the style of farming still employed in a lot of rural locations at that time. So the landscape would have looked very different at the time. You'd have had these huge fields full of these tiny little strips which tenant farmers would have been farming, and of course eventually a lot of those were then replaced by the enclosed fields, the small enclosed field with hedgerows that you see now. But of course now we're going back to the stage where some of the hedgerows are now disappearing, and they go because of modern mechanisation and wanting to go back to larger fields. So you know, this is how things change over time. The Sheldon family are also known for being for their weaving business, and they produce lots of tapestries. In fact, of course, one famously for those of you that live locally will be very familiar with the Sheldon tapestry in the Market Hall Museum. And their works were down in Barchester. Now I always think, I don't know, but this particular map, it almost has a certain quality to it. You can also imagine that being produced as a textile rather than just a parchment map, which it is at the moment. So I've got no evidence to back that up, but it's just my theory. And as I say, it is one of the oldest maps that we have here. So that's it. We've done quite well. We've got about 5 minutes left, but we can carry on a little bit longer if necessary. So I think the next thing, I'm going to go and sit down, and David is going to then let me know if we've got any questions that have come in, which I will attempt to answer if I can.
Yeah, we haven't got too many yet, so I'm going to just send that screenshot of how to ask a question live again, so people can have a look at that. And in the meantime, we will find one or two.
Do you mean any? Or?
We've got well, so far we've got 2 questions, but because I should say there is a little delay between what we're saying and what the public is seeing. So a few of the questions I'm not entirely sure which document they relate to, because people have asked them while we've been looking at a particular document. Okay. But I'll start with the first one, which I think probably relates to the Folk Gravel account. So somebody wanted to know what the document's actually called. The treasure of marine causes. That's usually what we refer to it as, or sometimes just Folk Gravel's accounts, Folk Gravel's accounts book, or as I mentioned earlier, I think there were 4 of them in total that we've got. But he was treasure of marine causes, I think, to give him his official title. And then we've got a subsequent question from Reese, who's asking what date is it from, and I think that must be referring to that last Braille's map that we were looking at there.
Okay, yeah, 1600. It's about 1600. That's when they were active.
Okay. Rosemary just wanting to say absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much. So we've got a positive response. That's great.
Thank you.
That's fantastic. And in the meantime, while we're waiting to see if anybody else wants to ask any questions, we can go for a nice classic one for Rob and just say, what's your favourite document, Rob?
Favourite document, that tends to vary actually. Apart from the ones that have gone on display, which I've obviously picked out because I like those. Another one that I'm quite fond of is the letter that we have in our collection for Oliver Cromwell, which dates from 1631. So it's when he was still living in Huntingdon, and it's basically a letter. It depends how you interpret it. It could sort of be interpreted 2 ways, but we think it's a letter that he's writing to John Newdigate of Arbury Hall, and basically he's apologising for the fact that he hasn't collected his hawk. Well, it's either that he hasn't collected the hawk from John Newdigate, or he hasn't arranged for the hawk to be returned to John Newdigate. It's slightly ambiguous, but I think it's the former. I think that's what generally most people think it is, the former. That he's had a man that's been hawking, and the hawk has ended up on the Newdigate estate. Now, how would the Newdigate estate have known that it belonged to Oliver Cromwell? Well, he mentions in the letter the varvels, which was like a sort of a ring that was part of the paraphernalia that hawkers used to use, would have been attached to the bird, and that so if that was on it, he would have had his insignia or his shield or something on there, which would have allowed it to be identified as his bird. And this particular letter is believed to be the 2nd oldest surviving letter written by Oliver Cromwell. So I think that's quite something that we've got that in our collection. It's very small and very frail. And on the back of it, one of the later Newdigates has written something like, this letter was written by that dastardly scoundrel Oliver Cromwell, or something like that. But they were actually, having a little bit of research around that, we think they were distantly related, actually, which may also, enable the connection between the two at some stage. So yeah, I'll say that one. Today, that's my favourite document.
Perfect. That's given us plenty of time, so we've got a nice set of questions coming in now. So Cindy wanted to ask, do you accept anything that people want to donate to the collection?
Well, we accept anything that fits within our collecting policy. So that, in broadest term, is anything relating to Warwickshire. It has to be Warwickshire, or the majority of it has to be Warwickshire. I mean, sometimes you have quite a large collection, and there will be material that relates to other neighbouring counties, for example, in which case there's a conversation to be had. But usually in those circumstances, we wouldn't split the collection, that we would take it in. But yeah, basically anything that we think, anything relates to Warwickshire, anything that's original, anything we think is going to be of interest to people in the future. So we're collecting now. We're not just collecting, art from past centuries. We're collecting for, documents for the future as well. And obviously we're also taking official records from parish councils. We're taking all of those as well, and for groups and societies as well. We won't necessarily taking everything. We tend to take in high level stuff like minutes and accounts, or on sort of more lower level stuff, 6 bundles of correspondence or individual letters, or deeds relating to a property, anything that's original and is not held elsewhere.
we would be interested in. So photographs as well. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a big photographic collection. So really, it's just a question of getting in touch with us and having that conversation, and you know, we'll establish whether we think it's something that is right for our collection. And the advantage of donating material to here, of course, is that if it comes to the record office and it's gifted to the record office, of course, then it'll stay here forever. It'll stay as part of our collections. It'll be made publicly accessible so people can come in and view it, and there's no risk that it's, you know, something's going to happen to it in the future. But obviously, you know, sometimes people prefer to donate material locally to local history groups as well, which is absolutely fine, because, you know, obviously there can be a resonance to a local community, and people like the idea that they still have records locally as well. So in those terms, we will continue to talk to local history groups and advise them about how they can store records locally as well, if that's something that they would prefer to do. So yeah, the thing is, you know, get in touch and have a conversation with us.
Great. Darren's asking, can we give a link to online material? So I think what I'll say to that is I'll try and do a quick bit of editing on the fly in a minute and put some of those website addresses in the PowerPoint at the end. But largely, I think it would be good to say if people Google Warwickshire County Record Office or our Warwickshire is a good place to start for finding some of our material online. The next question, somebody asks, anonymous asks, what are in the boxes by the tables at the other side of the room?
Oh, presumably we're talking about those. Yeah, those are pamphlets mostly. So we have a very David just scans to the right a little bit, so you can see we have a very extensive library as well here, collected over many years, and so many of the books go on the open shelves, but the smaller ones, or the more flimsy ones, we put them into pamphlet boxes. So they're newspaper cuttings, they're magazines, maybe it's got an article in of something that's relevant. They might be parish magazines, they might be local guides to a church, you know, all sorts of smaller printed material, not original archive material. All the original archive material is in the strong rooms, but yeah, people can come in and look at our library.
Excellent. Another question from anonymous then. Which collection do you think is the most popular or most requested? Oh,
right. Okay. Well, that's usually a competition. I mean, David might know this more than me, because I mean he keeps check on year on year on what documents have been produced. But it's usually a competition between Warwick Castle, which is no surprise, I suppose, which is a vast collection, and the other big one is, which we've also mentioned just now, actually, with the Oliver Cromwell letter, and that's the Newdigate of Arbury collection, which is also a fantastic collection. So Roger Newdigate in the 18th century was a sort of Renaissance man and travelled around Europe a lot, and there's all sorts of correspondence and notebooks and illustrations and all sorts of wonderful things in there, and a lot of academics come to view like to view that collection as well. So those are the two biggies, and then within any other particular year you might get other certain collections that are in particular of fashion at the moment, because they've fairly recently come in. A good example would be the Donald Healey Motor Company. The records we've got of that obviously been very popular recently, because we've taken that in the last 5 years, but that's a much smaller collection in size. So yeah, those are the two biggies, Newdigate and Warwick Castle.
Okay, another question from Cindy. Are most documents you collect, for example county registers, now electronic, and how do you store these?
Well, there is a whole issue there around born digital records, and I'm probably not the best person to speak about that. David is, because that's one of David's areas of responsibility. So we are, at the moment, we do have some software designed for storing digital born records. So certainly in the future, that's going to become a much bigger part. But in terms of actual records which are not born digital, then yes, we also do digitise material as well. This is only a sort of abbreviated behind the scenes. If it had been one when you're here in person, I probably would have shown you the Digi Suite, which is where in normal times we have staff digitising particular collections. I think you mentioned, I don't know if you were referring to council records. As I say, a lot of those still come in an original paper form, but that certainly is one area that we are going to be working on in the future in terms of a digital form. But also what we're doing, I'll give a plug to Woven, which is our online volunteers offer. where people and what we do is we're digitising various collections, and we're posting those online, and volunteers can join the project and transcribe the information in the digital record for us, with the idea that we'll eventually produce a more complete database of particular records. And at the moment, well, the big project on that is the depositions from the quarter sessions, which is like the witness statement accounts. And we've got a lot of those Victorian ones from the 19th century, really interesting, vivid accounts of Victorian life. And we've got volunteers that are currently inputting that information into a database. So we do the digitisation, we get that information out there for volunteers to work remotely. Woven, by the way, stands for Warwickshire Online Volunteer Network. I think that's right, isn't it?
I'll go with that, yeah.
Right.
I think we've probably just got one more question. We've got a few other questions, but they're getting a little bit too specific, I think, for us to give a good answer here. But we've got another question from Anonymous. What resources would you recommend for house history? Quite a broad one.
Right. Well, there is online on our website. If you have a look on our website, there are a couple of pages on there to advise you how you can go about doing your family history. Family history is sorry, did you say house history or family?
House history.
House history. Sorry, it's family. Yeah, house history. House history. I'm talking about. House history is an interesting one because it's often quite difficult to answer that when people email in, because it very much depends on what information they have and on what the information we have, what it reveals in the direction in which you take people. But typically we'll start by saying, have you got deeds to the property? That's really good if you've got deeds to the property, because that'll give you some names, particularly if you've got old parchment deeds. Names is really good because there are all sorts of sources where if you haven't got the names, it's very difficult to pinpoint them down to a particular place. So I'm thinking of things like census returns from 1841 through to 1911. Fantastic, they'll list all the people that lived in a particular property. Problem is, the addresses are often pretty, non-existent, to be honest, and so it can be quite difficult working out which house you're talking about. Not always, but it can be. So if you've already got some names to go on, that can help. Similarly with land tax returns, they'll take you back into the 18th century. They'll list people that were paying tax on land and also tenants. That can be useful. Maps of course is a big one. We've got ordnance survey maps, which they'll take us back to the 1880s, so we can identify the shape of a building, and we can see how it's changed over a period of time. For the same period, we've got a very good collection of building plans for most of the county. Again, even if we haven't got a plan of your particular house, we might have a plan of a house close by, which is very similar. So, those are worth looking at. And then what I mentioned earlier on the tide maps, which are absolutely fantastic. They're the most detailed maps you'll get before the Ordnance Survey maps, and they date from the 1840s. And they have those wonderful schedules with them as well. If you look on our website, there's a list of tithe apportionments, which will show you the names of tenants and owners. And we've digitised all the tithe maps, and at the moment you can't see the actual digitised version of those online, but that will perhaps eventually happen. But you can certainly come and look at the maps at the record office when we're open. So those are just some of the sources that you can come and look at. And as I say, to do a house history properly, I would probably recommend that you don't try and do it while we've got our bookable service, because you have to book everything in advance, and it's going to take you quite a while to find your way around. But when we get back to normal and you can come in and you can have a conversation with the duty archivist, and we can just point you in the right direction and just see how things develop. But start by looking at the information we've got on our website. So I think that's probably all we've got time for today. So I'm sorry if I haven't answered your questions, but please email us. We've got a record office at warwickshire.gov.uk. I think David's got that up on the screen now. Email us in. We're still, even though we're closed to the public, and we'll be going back to our houses now until we're allowed to reopen again. But we're still checking the emails every day, so we'll answer email inquiries as best we can. Obviously, we can't answer everything because we're separated from the documents most of the time. Look at our Warwickshire. David mentioned our Warwickshire, fantastic site which has lots of posts about all kinds of local history on it, and information about local history groups if you're interested in contacting a local history group as well. Look at our Friends of the Warwickshire County Record Office page, lots of posts on there. Look on Heritage and Culture Warwickshire's YouTube channel if you want to see various clips of films that we've posted on there, including some of us have had a go at making some recipes, so have a look at that. As well as Warwickshire's Past Unlocked, which is the online catalogue that I mentioned earlier. So I think that's about all I want to say. So I'll wrap things up now. Thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll be able to do something again like this in the near future, or maybe some of you will be able to come and visit us in person. So goodbye from me and goodbye from David.